Do you think free buses are a good idea? Well, that's the bold policy Democrat candidate Zoran Mamdani is bringing to the New York mayoral race this November.
So when people say buses can never be free, don't ask them to take a hike. Ask them to take the ferry. On June 24th, let's get some more free transit.
It sounds like an easy fix to traffic and pollution, but the truth about free public transport is far more complicated than it seems. Now, the idea is simple. Make the mass transit offer so good that people can't resist and all flock from their cars to the bus. But because politicians can only think in dollar values, and have tried nothing so that they're all out of ideas, their only solution is just to make one option, the bus, so cheap that you can't say no. But is the ultra-tempting offer of free public transport around a city really good enough to achieve the desired utopian aims that Zoran Mamdani and many other cities around the world claim it would? Well, luckily for us, and for the city of New York, this bold plan isn't really an experiment, as we can look at other cities and countries that have already tried free public transport. So what if I told you free public transport sounds amazing, but actually makes things worse and costs cities millions? Well, stick around, because today we're going to look at why free public transport is not only stupid, but actively detrimental. Since taxes already fund most of public transport, why not just pay a little extra and make it free? Well, advocates say it'll cut traffic, simplify fares, and help struggling commuters, especially as fuel prices soared after COVID and the war in Ukraine. It sounds like a simple solution to complex urban problems, but is it? Cities like Luxembourg, yes, I know it's a microstate, and Tallinn in Estonia implemented free public transport with the aim of reducing congestion by tipping the cost-benefit calculation heavily in favor of public transport. But there are actually a lot of other benefits to free public transport, such as the purported reduction in traffic congestion that will form a big component of this video that I'll get to later. The other big ticket benefit of free fares is actually addressing social inequality, something Zoran Mamdani strongly emphasizes in his campaign.
This whole campaign where we've talked about freezing the rent, making buses faster, free delivering universal childcare, these are not just slogans.
Right.
These are commitments.
Now, it's true that movement is a strong foundation of access to the job market, but it can also be a barrier if you're spending a significant chunk of your hourly wage just getting to your job. Making fares free would save New Yorkers over $1,000 per year. Now, one of the first and easiest benefits of free or super cheap fares is simplifying the ticket buying process, or completely nullifying it. Something that people really like bringing up when it comes to fare gates, because fare gates are the absolute bane of any transport system, and I don't care what you say about their simplicity, they suck. I actually already did a video about them a while ago. You can watch it here, but here's the summary. Basically, fare gates at train stations are an archaic mode of ticketing even before the smartphone era. They create bottlenecks at stations, hinder train station design as they require very precise path design, and also delay bus boarding as everyone needs to tap on or off. But worst of all, they are a very expensive piece of infrastructure that still needs to be managed by people. In Queensland alone, implementing contactless payments across the network cost nearly $500 million. And in New York, the same company implemented a ticketing system that cost nearly $1 billion. A lot of European countries in the DACH region, which is Switzerland, Germany, and Austria, don't have fare gates at all. Tickets are instead checked by roaming controllers. But when it comes to checking tickets on buses, Mamdani actually has a good point with free public transport, and it solves a real problem that they have in the city: safety of drivers. For some stupid reason, drivers are required to check the tickets of passengers and enforce non-payment. Now, I know it's not applicable to all buses, but it seems to be a recurring theme. Unfortunately, enforcing payment leads to confrontation that often end in drivers being assaulted by low-life pieces of shit. Free buses eliminate this confrontation by completely removing the need for fare enforcement, and it lets drivers focus on driving and decreases dwell times, speeding up trips, which, by the way, has been a major complaint about New York City buses. But even though public transport is predominantly a government-funded service, fares still make up a significant amount of revenue for transport companies. And in the case of New York City, the cost of Mamdani's free bus plan varies, but estimates all land around $700 million a year. Now, in a city whose yearly budget is over $100 billion, $700 million is a drop in the ocean. So why not throw a bone to the city's underprivileged, blue-collar workers? And if Mamdani is to be believed, slap a fat tax on the city's riches to fund it. Well, as economics tells us time and time again, there's no free lunch. And whilst 0.6% of a city's budget might seem like peanuts you nibble on at the bar, free transport is actually the equivalent of picking up those peanuts and throwing them on the floor. It might seem fun the first few times, until you realize you want a salty snack, and now you're walking on peanuts. Metaphors aside, free transport is a poor use of $700 million. Even if it is a small fraction of the budget. So what has happened when these cities and countries implemented a really low fare system or free fares for a very expensive price tag? Well, in cities and countries that have implemented it, the results have often fallen short of what proponents promised or achieved those goals in a very, very, very costly way. Numerous studies examining these initiatives consistently reach the same conclusion. Making public transport free rarely delivers the transformative impact its supporters claim. Now, I'm going to go through the realities behind the expectations of free public transport, but all these realities share one recurring theme: the value proposition. When it comes to helping disadvantaged populations, the discussion is nuanced, but one thing is clear. The focus shouldn't be on public transport saving someone $1,000 a year in fares. There are some massive, deep-rooted economic problems in New York City, and the cost of the bus is not really one of them. If fares are truly unaffordable for some, that points to a deeper structural problem beyond ticket prices. Moreover, much of the lost revenue from fare-free schemes ends up benefiting riders who don't really rely on subsidies and would have taken the bus anyway. When it comes to other social problems, particularly antisocial behavior and assaults on bus drivers enforcing ticketing,
Bus wankers!
Mamdani's proposal is that free buses would eliminate fare collection, removing the confrontation possibility entirely. Which, yeah, it makes sense in a really roundabout way, and is the equivalent of not trying in order to avoid failure. But before we get to the value proposition of eliminating fares, I need to ask one question. Why the fuck is the bus driver enforcing fares? This is not their job. Their job is to drive the bus open and close the doors. They shouldn't be enforcing fares because they're in the most vulnerable position to do so. That is sitting down and alone and having to decide whether to delay the bus or let fare dodgers go. What should happen instead is roaming fare enforcement teams with the authority, time, and muscle to actually enforce payment and control fare dodgers. Let the fare dodgers board, then let the enforcement teams catch him. This also applies to the stupid subway fare gates in New York. It's a New York pastime to jump the turnstiles, made redundant by a simple door. So they already have roaming teams of enforcement anyway. So you may as well just get rid of those flimsy fare gates and replace them with roaming fare enforcement teams. Now, before any of you bleeding heart wankers say this is just a poorly veiled attempt to punish those who can't afford it, think again. A lot of fare dodgers end up committing a lot of antisocial crime on public transport, or have designer brand clothes, clearly indicating they don't need the money. And in some horrible cases, they have outstanding warrants for their violent crimes. Oh, but how will people pay for tickets? It's 2025. Use an app or ticket machines that some buses in New York already uses. If European countries can do it, so can you. But there's another very useful and important barrier to entry that fare-free removes, and not in a good way. It removes the barrier for opportunistic dickheads. Fares are a small barrier for people who genuinely need transport, but a large barrier for those who don't, especially the groups of rowdy idiots who just want to ride 2 or 3 stops at night after they had a few beers. As mentioned before, a lot of people willing to commit these petty crimes often aren't the outstanding citizens. In Scotland, a 2022 trial giving under 22s free bus rides led to a sudden surge in assaults on drivers, and the same thing happened in London with fare-free travel under 16s. This is because, without even a minimal barrier to entry, these groups feel emboldened to abuse a free service. What better way to act out than being in a moving enclosed space that takes you around the city? So while free transport solves one social problem, it creates another. The barrier to entry, though it sounds bad, actually helps ensure that the limited public transport resources are used by those who really need them. Removing it entirely and you risk overloading the system in acute areas. Yes, it's true that fare-free public transport induces demand, just like building more roads does. But that might sound great for mobility and the economy, but buckling parts of your transport system isn't. Low-value trips, short, trivial journeys, or those that could have been walked, distort transport demand. They place additional strain on an already underfunded system. As a personal example, when I traveled across Germany using the Deutschland ticket, I took local and regional trains from Mannheim to Cologne. Since the ticket doesn't include faster ICE trains, I ended up on slow regional ones, already packed with people doing the same thing. Which sounds like a great problem to have, but the local regional networks designed to service small, beautiful villages are suddenly inundated by people who just want to transit through, instead of using the direct and faster intercity service. So that poor Siemens to Zero, that is designed to carry around 200 people, is now tasked with handling hundreds more of people at once. And I can just hear people in the comments saying, well, just add more train cars. Yes, that is a solution, but not one that can instantly be done, because you need to source more trains and then fiddle with the timetables to account for the larger train and longer dwell times. It takes time and money to adapt to these changes in transport behavior. And this is evidenced when Germany implemented the Deutschland ticket. Transport operators around the country predicted a surge in ridership, which was correct, but they didn't know where, and they couldn't exactly plan instantly the increased funding required to implement larger trains or the capacity requirements. And in the case of New York City, the buses are already full.
And then the bus looks like that. I can't even get on. I got a bad knee, so I can't stand. I'm standing here, that's why I'm holding up the wall.
Free or cheap schemes can't easily scale capacity, and the network planning becomes very, very chaotic. But worst of all, this surge doesn't even mean fewer cars on the road. Which leads us to the burning question that's actually a huge myth about free public transport. The big ticket promise of cheap or free fares, reducing car usage and traffic, doesn't work. From Brisbane to Tallinn, Luxembourg, Brussels, and Germany, the results are conclusive. It doesn't happen. Cities saw massive increases in ridership with cheap or free fares, yes, but they also saw trivial decreases in car use. So if there's been a rise in transport ridership, where are these riders coming from, if not from car drivers? Well, there was a modal shift happening, but it was from walking and cycling to public transport, not driving to public transport. So whilst ridership goes up, active transport goes down. And the little car to bus shift that does happen quickly fades as the slightly improved traffic congestion is eaten after a short time. Because as we know, more space just induces more driving. Free fares won't make people ditch their cars, not when the product itself is broken. You can't give away a bad experience and expect people to take it. You don't see people lining up for free shin kicks, so why would you expect them to line up for free, slow, infrequent, crowded, and dangerous buses? Such an experience is honestly just about as fun as a hard kick in the shins. People value time over savings, so if the bus is slow, crowded, and uncomfortable, even free won't fix that. And spending nearly $500 million in New York to not reduce congestion is wildly wasteful. So why don't free fares work? Well, the value proposition of free public transport is just shit compared to cars. And if you don't believe me that people are willing to pay for good public transport, then let's take Switzerland as an example. It has one of the most expensive fare systems in the world, yet some of the highest per capita ridership of trains. That tells you everything you need to know. People pay for quality. In multiple transport user surveys worldwide, reliability, convenience, and travel time consistently rank far above cost as a deciding factor for passengers. And when cost is mentioned, it's usually in terms of value for money, the balance between price and benefit, rather than the price value alone. And Mamdani's plan to blow nearly $1 billion on free buses doesn't improve any of these. Let's zoom in on the biggest pain points: convenience, reliability, and time. Mamdani said buses need to be faster, and he's right. But if you watch footage of New York buses, the answer is staring you right in the face. It's not the fares slowing the buses down. It's boarding and traffic. And these things shred the convenience, reliability, and time performance indicators for buses. The YouTube channel More Perfect Union even cited fare payments as a major delay. Yeah, because you're using one door. Use both. In most of Europe, that's standard. Even Brisbane figured it out during COVID that boarding from both doors is faster. But in New York, buses still use the front door so that the driver can control fares. But as I said earlier, they shouldn't be managing fares at all. Just open all the doors and let people take responsibility for paying the fares. And what's with these 80s style buses with 2 doors? Get proper ones, 3, 4, even 5 doors like in Switzerland on bi-articulated buses. Sure, it has fewer seats, but faster boarding saves everyone's time. But the biggest time loss comes from when buses are moving, and it's not hard to see the real enemy: traffic. New York's buses are painfully slow. Manhattan's bus routes average under 11 kilometers per hour, or 7 miles per hour. Luckily, fixing city traffic isn't rocket science. Our gridlock streets, drawn by someone armed with only a square, just need some painted bus lines and a bit of signal priority. But hang on a moment. New York already has bus lanes, and oh yeah, there's your problem. But this is super important to manage your bus lanes, and they need to be enforced correctly to be free at all times. Actually, you can even see the police parking in it, so there's no surprise there. Now, bus lanes are great, but they quickly become meaningless at the numerous intersection buses have to wait at, which is where signal priority comes in. Momentarily stopping traffic to let buses go through is an important component of a BRT system. But these solutions aren't some wanky European solutions for America, but instead solutions that the MTA already suggest. The MTA is the organization that manages the New York buses, and they list all the solutions they need to improve their buses. So why Mamdani would go beyond the scope of what they're already begging for to instead redirect funds to the most ineffective policy feels like satire at this point. Meanwhile, Brisbane faces the same story. Cheap fares, but buses stuck in traffic. But don't worry, the LNP has a solution. Build a metro, not a metro. Oh god, this thing will keep rearing its ugly head, won't it? Infrastructure upgrades are what really make people ditch their cars, not free rides. But anyone who's been involved in expensive projects knows there's a very important component of the feasibility studies, the opportunity cost. Basically meaning, what else can you buy with this money? And for the reported $700 million, you could buy a lot, such as more fair enforcement officers or more bus lanes. Now, if we use the typical US bureaucracy figures of the cost to build a bus lane per kilometer, you could paint approximately 700 kilometers of new bus lanes in New York every year for the cost of free fares. And with Queensland's 50-cent fares that cost nearly $300 million a year, they could implement a few kilometers of bus lanes or fund a small fraction of the final stage of the cancelled Gold Coast Light Rail. Instead, with free fares, that money vanishes into a policy that feels good but doesn't work. Free fares distract from the real issues: speed, safety, and reliability. So if you want to address equity, safety, and congestion, Congestion pricing basically does already that, except it actually brings in more money. It tackles the root cause, cars, and it funds public transport instead of draining it. Look at London, Stockholm, Singapore. All saw less traffic, faster buses, and higher ridership after they implemented a congestion pricing. London's bus speeds rose 30% in 1 year after their congestion pricing. And here's the kicker. Congestion pricing makes money. Free fares just burn it. Now, in conclusion, Zoran Mamdani's goals are noble, tackling inequality, congestion, and safety. But free buses don't actually solve those problems, or are a very, very, very expensive way to go about it. If you remove fares, you might fix driver safety, but that's just one issue, and it can be solved more directly by removing fare management from drivers altogether. If you want to speed up buses, don't make them free. Give them lanes, signal priority, and proper design to build something like a BRT. If you want to make life fairer for low-income New Yorkers, invest in reliability and coverage, not $0 gimmicks. But unfortunately, stupid policies like free buses sound better than the boring stuff the MTA is screaming out for. Free stuff always sounds good on the campaign trail. Infrastructure and enforcement changes are cheaper, simpler, and honestly, they're way more effective. So yeah, Mamdani's diagnosis is right, but his prescription is way off. Targeted subsidized public transport helps poor people, and boosting fair enforcement and security on public transport improves transit safety. In the end, people would rather pay for something that works than settle for a free version that just makes a bad product bearable. Now, if you like this transport rant, consider subscribing and commenting on which project you think I should roast next.